Item 6. Yes. No. Item 5E. Our CFO, Erick Rangel, will present the third quarter report.
Good evening, City Council members. As Mayor said, I'll provide an update on Q3 financial information for the City of Brookings. Per usual, we'll start with our January to September tax revenue intake. On the top left, we see the table. The first column has the revenues and this by sales tax type. The second column is our budgeted for the full year amount. The third column in blue, it's our prorated amount, which is where we should be in September, at the end of September. Our fourth column is our actuals, how much have we actually taken. Fifth column in yellow is the difference between our budget and our actuals, and then number 6 is just percentage-wise. So I'd like to focus your attention to the first total in bold numbers, which is with our sales-driven tax. We're currently sitting at a 10.7% higher than anticipated, which is about $1.1 million of revenue surplus in terms of our sales. So the chart on your right, all the way to the right, shows our that 10.7% versus budget. And then the column on the far left shows versus last year. This is actually your sales tax growth. So we're seeing at about a 7.8% growth year over year. So if we add, now going back to the table, the last row is the grand total, which has our property tax. So altogether, the city is about a 10.2% surplus versus budget, which is about a $1.3 million. It is important to note that even though we had a good last year compared to what we were expecting, these numbers, the growth this year is a lot higher because we didn't grow as much. We were mainly flat last year. So this growth seems higher, but it's mainly a catch-up function of our low levels last year. When looking at the tax by industry, we're continuing to see the same trend as the previous quarters, where the construction, manufacturing, and transportation industries have declined year over year, mostly because a lot of them had growth last year. But that decline is being offset by the wholesale trade, retail trade, and finance industries mostly that are experiencing a material growth this year. These numbers do exclude bid and 3B tax information. It's just the first and second penny. And lastly, if you'd like more detail on our sales tax, we have a lot of information in our city website. So please just click on the link or happy to go to our website, search for it. We'll have a lot more information regarding sales tax trends. The next one's an update on our remote sellers tax, or what a lot of people call the internet tax. As a reminder, this is the tax that we started collecting in 2019, late 2019, I believe, and these were transactions that don't happen in state. So on and all, on average, it's about 7.5% of our total of our sales tax, and this year we've had all the way from $113,000 on a given month, and the low this year has been around $76,000, but it's pretty consistent around 7.5% across the board. All right. If we move on now to expenses, and we'll start with our general fund. As a reminder, this is how we fund our main operations and departments across the city, and this is mainly funded by that first penny. The table in the slide here, it's about the same information that we saw earlier. We start first column on the left, it's our expenditures by department or by category. Number 2 is our full year budget. Column 3, it's a prorated year-to-date budget. Column 4 is the actuals. Column 5 is the difference of actuals versus budget. A negative number here would mean a deficit at this given point of time. The next column, number 6, is the percentage used. And then number 7, it's our revenue, how the revenues forecasted for each department are compared to the actual revenues received. So as a whole, if we go all the way to the bottom, you see that the general fund's about at 70% or 69.6% of actual spend. Just as a good benchmark, we should be at around 75% because it's the end of the third quarter. That represents $567,000 surplus in terms of expenses. Now, the revenue side, the story is even better because mainly driven by the relief from the federal government, the American Rescue Plan that we just received at the end of September. We're sitting at about a $2.1 million surplus. Now, in terms of the expense, that $567,000, the surplus is mainly driven by the timing of expenses, and we've had some vacancies in cities positions that favorably impact our budget. And then the departments that show a deficit right now, we have 4. It's just mainly due to timing, and we expect them to finish at budget or under budget by the end of the year. Moving on to the capital improvement projects and other funds. As a reminder, the capital improvement fund, it's the one that drives and the spend for any equipment or big capital purchases over $25,000. This is mainly funded by our second penny. So our table on our left side, the first line of numbers shows our budget and how we're about 27% used at the end of September. We've spent around $2.7 million for it. Now, this fund also includes debt and different transfers that are provided to other funds. So excluding debt and other non-project based spend, we would be at around 37% of actual project money spent this year. The main drivers of the actual spend to date are debt payments, street work, fire department trucks, and different vehicles for different departments. And as a whole, overall, the city is at about 47.9% of our budget. This number excludes the Swiftel Center numbers for the third quarter. We're working to finalize the financials due to the transitions, and we will present an update. I think the first week in the first session in December, we'll provide an update on how we think we're going to close with the Swiftel Center. All right, so this slide summarizes our city council priority project list. And as a reminder, this is where we fund this, or I guess the source of funding for this list is the unassigned liquid assets of the city. So as we start top left, we start with $14 million at the end of 2020. We take out our 15% and 5% operational reserves dictated by our G&E policy. That leaves us with around $10.5 million to fund initiatives. The second table right below it shows all the initiatives that have been acted upon this year. We start with the 2021 facility improvements through a budget appropriation that's $1.4 million. We, in the last budget amendment, we approved $522,000 for the Public Safety Center initial or phase 1 stage, and then the housing study for $35,000. The total of these approved projects is around $1.9 million. That leaves us with $8.5 million available to fund other initiatives. The next ones on the list are the primary projects. These have not been acted upon, although some of them are included in today's budget, second ordinance, and the budget amendment as well. But those are the next in line that would be funded if council decides to take action. The first one is the 2022 facility improvements from the McKinstry study. That's $1.1 million. The fire department training tower, that's $440,000. The public safety center, the entire remaining of the project estimates $6.4 million. The food bank, that's $300,000, which is included in the second reading of the budget amendment that will be brought up on tonight. The downtown master plan for $35,000, and the indoor rec center for $850,000. All these primary projects, the estimated spend is about $9.2 million. With that, if we decide to implement all that, we would run at a deficit of $659,000. On the right, we show our secondary projects, which include debt payments and the facility improvements. These facility improvements from 2023 to 2025 are included in our 10-year capital CIP plan as well. And then we show bike trails and pay down of debt payment. And then next down in line is the desired project list that are not in priority order, just a bunch of initiatives that our leadership team recommends analyzing if funds are available. All right, moving on to the economic update. Basically, the story for the U.S. As a whole, it's a growth of around 5.7% at the end of 2021. That's what experts are forecasting. They're forecasting slower growth in 2023 of 2022 of 3.8% and about 3% for 2023. The growth in this year is mainly driven for consumer spending, just more activity and in-person services by the end of 2021. However, I think that the main risk, we all know it's inflation, is starting to hit really high. And if we can see in the table, that last row, we can see in 2020, we had about 1.2% in our CPI inflation, PCE, sorry, inflation. It jumps to 3.6 estimated in 2021. 2022 will still remain high, which is 3%, and then 2023 will go down to the Fed's target, which is around 2%. So we've got current year with high inflation and expected higher inflation next year as well. Just as a good reference point, South Dakota is also experiencing that. In September, we had 5.7% inflation compared to the previous September. So definitely some factors to look at. However, I think our outlook for our regional economy still remains strong given our experience. We're experiencing really high growth in our sales tax of about 7.8%. So we believe that our region will outperform our domestic projections. But our region is also being impacted by three main factors that we need to keep an eye on, and each: the tight labor market, the supply chain issues, and a potential COVID wave as well. And lastly, I would like to present an update on the American Rescue Plan. And as a reminder, this is the aid that was signed into law by the federal government in March 2021, and it allocates around $350 billion to state and local governments as a fiscal recovery fund to address COVID-related issues. So our city was confirmed to receive an allocation of $4.37 million. And then the timeline here shows what's relevant to the management of these funds. So we'll start on the left. In March 21, anything that's available to be reimbursed by this $4.37 million, it has to be incurred after March 3rd, 2021. The city received their first deposit at the end of September of $2.18 million. We're scheduled to receive the second deposit of the second half of these funds by the end of September next year. December 2024 is when we need to obligate the funds. That means that we need to commit it, and if we need to sign contracts or for any projects, they need to be signed by this date. However, the work can be finalized until December 2026. Although these funds are more flexible than the previous CRF aid, they're also restricted in terms of to address public health emergency or other negative economic impacts, which can include the mitigation of COVID-19, the prevention, medical expenses, behavioral health care, design and execution of health programs, and many other related issues. It's also allowed for premium pay for workers performing essential work. It also allows for revenue replacement, but it excludes any utilities revenue that the city would have. It also allows for infrastructure investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. And lastly, it is important to note that we cannot use any of these funds to match other federal grants. So the city is currently designing a community engagement process to make sure that we listen to our community needs in the short and long term, and to be able to prioritize these funds before we spend any of them. With that, that's the end of the report, and I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Anybody on the